So today I thought I would talk you through some of our invertebrates known as arachnids. Invertebrates are animals that do not possess a backbone. So mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians and fish are all vertebrates. Any animal that isn't one of those is classed as an invertebrate. Now, invertebrates comprise many phylums of animals and there's absolutely tons of them. In fact, 95% of all animal life is invertebrate life. Now, within all of those different phylums of invertebrates, eventually you will find a phylum called Arthropoda. And Arthropoda contains arthropods. Now, arthropods are all of the invertebrates that we know of that essentially have an exoskeleton. So they include arachnids like tarantulas here, they include insects, crabs, lobsters, millipedes, you name it. So essentially, arachnids are just a class within the massive phylum that is Arthropoda. Alright, so as you can see, I thought I would start with this dude here. This is a Mexican red-kneed tarantula and they come from, you guessed it, Mexico. Now, just to run over the basic body plan of an arachnid, all arachnids have 4 pairs of walking legs. There's a cephalothorax, which is where the head and the thorax of the animal are fused together, and they have an abdomen, which is the bulbous, squidgy looking bit on the end of the spider. Now, arachnids also have pedipalps, which are a pair of appendages at the front of the animal that help to capture and maneuver food. And the final characteristic is chelicerae, which are essentially the fangs of spiders. This dude technically does have fangs, so he could bite me if he wanted to, but he's a good boy and he's really well behaved, as are most spiders in general. If for any reason he decided to prove me wrong and did sink his fangs into me, this would hurt, it would be painful, but essentially it's no worse than a bee sting. So this guy's venom is not very potent as such. So it would hurt a lot, but I'd have nothing to worry about. And in general, if you got bit by one of these, though it would hurt quite a bit, you wouldn't need to worry unless you did have anaphylaxis, in the same way as people can be allergic to a simple bee sting. One of the ways that tarantulas from the New World, so that is North and South America, one way that they can defend themselves is by flicking something called urticating hairs, which are a load of hairs on the abdomen, which if they do happen to get on you can be really, really itchy. I'd compare it to getting fiberglass rash, essentially. So they'd be quite itchy. If they got in my eyes at all, that would be really, really quite painful and would cause me some kind of temporary blindness. So it's a really good way of deterring predators, because obviously most predators in the wild, unlike us that pick things up with our hands because we're quite dexterous, most predators obviously would go into an animal head first. So by flicking those urticating hairs, they've got a good chance of getting it in the eye of an attacker, and then that gives them enough time to get away while the predator is being irritated by those urticating hairs. This here is another one of our tarantulas. This is a Chilean rose tarantula and it comes from South America, specifically the dry desert and shrubland areas of Chile. Now, a spider's eyesight is really quite poor, so even though she's very close to me and I can see her in lots of intricate detail, she won't really be able to see me at all. And that's because even though spiders have between 6 and 8 eyes, these are very, very simple eyes known as ocelli, and they're really, really quite poor. So because their eyesight is pretty poor, spiders actually generally rely on touch as a sense in order to know where they're going and to find prey. And all of the hairs that cover tarantulas are actually sensory hairs, so they can detect vibrations and movement in the air. Unlike in mammals, where hair is predominantly to provide warmth and insulation, in tarantulas, those hairs are sensory and help them to know when prey comes into contact with them. Spiders are of course famous for creating webs, and tarantulas are no exception. Now, they don't create the huge extravagant webs of orb weaver spiders like the kind you'd find in your garden, but they will still produce silk. And what they will typically do is line the inside of their burrows and the flooring with these webs so that again they can feel if prey comes nearby. And as the silk comes out of the abdomen, these little appendages here, which are called spinnerets, work essentially a little bit like knitting needles, helping to place the silk in the desired areas. You can actually see if I can get the silk to catch the light properly, that she is actually spinning silk on me as we speak, using these two tiny spinnerets here. Okay, so now we can move on to my favourite order of arachnids, the scorpions. And this here is an Asian forest scorpion. So it's one of the largest scorpions that you can find out there. There's only a few that get as big as this. Most scorpions are significantly smaller. Modern scorpions like this one are descended from phenomenally old organisms. In fact, sea scorpions were one of the first creatures to colonise the land millions of years ago. Scorpions have been found to date back to the Silurian period, which is roughly 435 million years ago. Now that's pretty old, especially if you think that dinosaurs evolved roughly 240 million years ago and went extinct 65 million years ago. So these dudes arrived before them and they're here long after the dinosaurs are gone. The pedipalps of scorpions, so those appendages closest to the mouth parts, have developed into claws, also known as chela, and these help scorpions catch and restrain prey as they eat it. Scorpions also have very, very cool sensory apparatus called pectines, which are on the underside of the cephalothorax. But to show you with this girl, I'm going to have to put her in a small tank and show you from underneath. There we go, so they're those little wing-like things there, they're really cool. And they're used for olfaction, so they're essentially for smelling. And you can also sex certain scorpions by seeing how big those pectines are. Normally, in a male scorpion, these pectines would be quite a lot larger than in the female. And that is to help the males to be able to smell out a female when it's ready for them to mate. We know that this one here is a female because in addition to having those slightly smaller pectines, she also gave birth to many, many babies several years ago, and here they are on her back. Now these scorpions are one of the few invertebrates that will show some element of maternal care. So actually when they have the babies and they give birth to live young, those babies will crawl on the mother's back and she will look after them until they have their first shedding cycle, so until they shed their skin for the first time, after which they will crawl off the mum's back and they're free to go about their business unsupervised. So this is our second species of scorpion. This here is an emperor scorpion, and though it's a little bit smaller than the Asian forest scorpion at the minute, when fully grown it'll be about the same size. Some of you might have seen on documentaries that when people are searching for scorpions, particularly at night time, they can do so using a special ultraviolet light, and the scorpions will glow under it, so they look almost this kind of greeny yellowy colour. These scorpions can do the exact same thing, but unfortunately I haven't got the appropriate light to be able to show you it glowing. That is caused by a chemical in the chitin, so the material that makes up the exoskeleton of scorpions, and that chemical is called hyalin. And essentially when a black light or ultraviolet light of the right wavelengths hit it, that is what causes the scorpion to glow in the dark. Now, if this guy holds himself at the right angle, you'll be able to have a really, really good look at the stinger on the end of the tail. Now, that is called the telson. However, just like with the tarantulas, if for any reason this one did sting me, it's nothing but a bad bee sting. Now, this telson, or venom bulb as some people call it, sits right at the end of the digestive system as well. So lots of people think that you can take the venom bulb off of a scorpion and that will stop you from getting stung, but in doing that, if you did happen to cut that off, you would also destroy the end of the digestive system, and that's because the anus is just behind the telson. So what that would mean is, as that scabs over, it would essentially block the digestive system from being able to work properly, and eventually that would kill the scorpion. Okay, so now I've put away the tarantulas and scorpions, we can start getting out some of the really unusual arachnids. This here is a tailless whip scorpion, but the name itself is a little bit misleading because they're not scorpions at all, but belong to an order called Amblypygae. Tailless whip scorpions actually have become more well known to the general public in recent years, since one of them was used to film in the 4th Harry Potter film. Now, people originally thought that it was all animated until they later found out that actually these are real animals and they're called tailless whip scorpions. So this one that I've got here comes from countries in and around Tanzania in East Africa. The pedipalps are exaggerated into these huge arms, and you can actually use these arms to sex tailless whip scorpions. So with this one here, I know it's a male because if the elbow joint, we'll call it today, is longer than the first joint in the first pair of legs, that means you've got a male. If, however, that elbow joint is actually shorter than the joint in the first pair of walking legs, that means you've got a female. Now, the name whip scorpion originates from the fact that the first pair of legs have become very, very long, elongated, and they basically form these kind of feelers. They don't have an olfactory sense the same as the antennae of insects, but they are able to feel around in the dark. Even though he looks a little bit scary, he's actually completely harmless. In fact, he's the only arachnid that we have that couldn't hurt me even if he tried. Technically, the tarantulas could bite me or flick hairs. Technically, the scorpion could pinch me or sting me, but these guys don't have mouth parts that can bite into people, and if he did ever manage to grab me with one of those long pedipalps, it would be laughable. You would barely feel it at all. So he's completely harmless, even though, granted, he does look a little bit freaky looking. It can, however, run quite fast compared to tarantulas, but it's not going to beat me in a marathon, and that's because these guys, if they do move fast, will only do so over a very, very short distance. So if he moves fast, normally it will just be to run onto the other side of my hand. Okay, so last but certainly not least is this guy. This here is a giant Vinegaroon. So the giant Vinegaroon comes from the southwest of the United States and Mexico. So again, quite dry, arid locations. Now, just like the tailless whip scorpion, you'll see with this guy that it almost looks at first as if he's got 6 legs rather than 8. And that is because, again, same as with the tailless whip scorpion, that first set of walking legs has become very elongated, and they will also use them for feeling around in the dark. Some of you guys might be thinking that Vinegaroon is a little bit of a gnarly name, and the reason they get that name is actually because they're able to squirt vinegar, acetic acid, which is essentially vinegar. They can squirt from this very, very long bit at the end of their abdomen. Now, using acetic acid or vinegar as a defense tactic is pretty good, really, because if for any reason this guy felt threatened and managed to squirt some acetic acid into my eye, it would sting in the same way as if I was a bit careless with my fish and chips and got some malt vinegar in my eyes. One of the other final cool traits of this guy is these really, really large chela on the end of the pedipalps, which are essentially very, very big claws that look a little bit like a lobster's. Those are what it uses to grab and overpower prey. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all of our arachnids. So hopefully you've learned something a little bit new and realised that they're fascinating animals that we shouldn't be scared of.